One of the signs today in Egypt that something big was happening was when Egyptian state TV started running with the slogan, "Egypt is changing." I mean, everything's always changing in some gradual sense, but there are moments in the world at which there is abrupt major change. Things bend and bend and bend and bend, and then they break. Since the Korean War, really, these breaks, these abrupt changes in power, they don't usually happen by war anymore. I mean, that's not always the case. We invaded Iraq and overthrew that government. But generally speaking, in the last 50 years or so, governments have not been overthrown as a result of other foreign countries invading them. It's been popular uprisings. It's been military coups. It's been civil wars. It's been internal struggles to overthrow either the person in power or the whole system of power. What's been so compelling to American audiences in particular about what's happening in Egypt is what the uprising there looks like, the character of it. This didn't start with the military there. It didn't start with some Islamist faction. It didn't even start with organized political opposition. This is a popular and populist uprising of people who are through with the system they were living under. Egypt is the cornerstone of the Middle East. Because of that, this is not just another international news turmoil story. This changes the world. But in terms of understanding what happens next, we do have a lot of precedent to consult. If you squint, you can see what happened in Tahrir Square today in Berlin in 1989. You can see what happened in Tahrir Square today in the Philippines in 1986. You can see what happened in Tahrir Square today in Poland in 1989, in the Republic of Georgia in 2003, in Iran in 1979, in Tunisia just last month, in Ukraine in 2004. People rise up against bad governments. It happens, and it usually moves us as Americans when it does because of our own history. But when you look at just that partial list of popular uprisings that overthrew governments, just in my living memory, just off the top of my head, basically, those uprisings didn't all produce the same outcome. From Islamic theocracy in Iran to the world's most robust secular capitalist economy in Germany, to the halfway there democratic fragility of the Philippines today, to the former Soviet bloc cautiously capitalist growing democracies of Georgia and Ukraine and Poland, to the absolute uncertainty of what comes next in Tunisia. The people rising up and overthrowing their government is a process, not an outcome. Just like democracy itself is a process and not an outcome. There is not necessarily a connection between whether or not the uprising itself is peaceful and whether the outcome of that uprising is ultimately a citizen-led democratic government that represents the will of its people. What happens next after these protesters in Egypt inevitably win is a test of whether or not a democratic society can bloom essentially instantly after decades that were not democratic and that were not citizen-led. Can they turn themselves into a polity? Can they do it? Can they pull it off? Stay tuned for a long time.